Hey everyone, welcome back and thanks for watching another episode of My Story Weaves Our Story. Just to recap, My Story Weaves Our Story is a diversity panel which reflects and represents the unique perspectives and viewpoints of community members in MPC's service area. Now on this first season, we sat down with various community groups, had great discussion, and had some insightful moments listening to their stories. So today, without further ado, we're going to wrap up season 1 with our last group, the Appalachian Community. Now, if you're listening to this episode, I would encourage that you go watch this on YouTube because this was the first podcast that we did in person, and we have some pretty cool visuals and photos to go along with it. We have 2 amazing guests, and their stories were so informative. Check it out. All right, everyone, welcome back to My Story Weaves Our Story. We are here live for the first time at Laurel Ridge Community College. We want to thank them for offering up their campus in Luray. It was an amazing opportunity to do this live. We typically do this virtually. Tina, I think we started this, well, I didn't start it. I think the podcast started during the pandemic. Is that correct?
Yes, it did.
So it was sort of a necessity to do that virtually. And it's also easy sometimes for people's schedules to do it all online. But I'm excited to do it in person this time because we have 2 amazing guests and they have prepared a lot of their backstory and we're excited to hear about it. But before we get into it, I just want to do some quick introductions. I am the co-host, Gabriel. You got it.
I am Nancy. I'm Beth.
I'm Tina.
And we are going to be talking today about some of the experiences of the Appalachian community. So I'm going to go ahead and start off with the first question for you guys. You guys can answer to your heart's content, however long you feel you need to make it. Nancy, I'll have you answer first, and then Beth, you can go after Nancy. So for the audience, the first question we're going to ask is, tell us your story. Who are you?
Okay, I'm Nancy Cotter. I'm 72 years old. I grew up on a farm here in Page County. I attended Luray Elementary School and Luray High School, and then I went to college in North Carolina for 2 years. And then I transferred to VCU in Richmond and graduated with a BS degree in elementary education. I taught for 34 years at Shenandoah Elementary School in Shenandoah and loved it, loved the kids, loved most of the parents.
Was that all K through 5?
It was K through 7.
Oh.
Yes, and I taught summer school there also.
Okay.
And I have taught preschool all the way up to GED classes, adult education at the Page County Technical Center. And I've traveled extensively, but not overseas. I've been to the Caribbean and Panama Canal, Bermuda, Aruba, Mexico, Nova Scotia, Alaska, the West Coast, of course, Florida. And I live about 3 miles from here. So I've done a lot, but I still have a lot to do.
Beautiful property that you guys live on as well. Carrie your daughter was fortunate enough to bring me over there one time, and I was so jealous of all the land that you guys have and the beautiful views you guys have.
It's peaceful and quiet.
Yeah.
Lots of animals, some we like, some we don't like possums and
skunks.
Skunks.
You gotta take the good with the bad.
Yeah, it's okay. It's all good.
What about you, Beth?
I am Beth Falls, and I've lived here all my life in Luray. I was born here in the Luray Hospital and went to one school, which was, I went to a kindergarten in a class, a private home, and then the school I went to, I started first grade in the hallway. And everybody thought that was great in school because we were the only kids that had a water fountain because I was in the hallway. But the school was crowded at that time, and since then it's become the middle school for the county.
So there was a reason why you were in the hallway because it was too crowded?
Yes.
Okay.
Way too crowded.
Wow.
They had, we were considered war babies, and we were right after World War II, and there were a lot of us. and they didn't know what to do with this first grade. And there were 4 first grades when I went to the school. So
Wow.
a lot of us.
Wow.
Yeah. And I worked for the county for about 4 years, did a lot of work for them. The first big thing we had to do was compile a history of the county. And we started on that in January, and it went into print and was out by the 4th of July, which was really record time in getting all this material and pictures together. And we sold that for the county.
How old are you about that time?
76.
Okay, when you were working for, so.
Oh,
what-
how old was I then?
Well, last thing I remember was you in first grade, and then when did you start working for the county?
When in 75.
Okay.
In 75. And 76 is when the county was celebrating, or the country was celebrating their centennial. And our county wanted to do something spectacular. And the first thing we did was work on the book. But there were big events planned each month of 76 here in the county.
Okay.
So from there, I went on to, I have one son. Then I became a tour guide. And that was very interesting because I worked for an inbound company and an outbound country. So I had tours coming into the county and into Virginia from overseas, and then we had tours from Virginia going out. And that was good for me because I could tell them all about my county and Virginia. So,
So between you being a tour guide and then you working to compile, as a part of that effort to compile that history, you probably know so much about Page County, I'm guessing. And just Virginia history and in general.
I also worked
US
on
history.
another book too.
Wow.
So I've really helped to produce 2 books on the county.
Wow.
And the second one was pictorial,
Okay.
Page County, which we looked for pictures that had never been in print before that represented all phases of life within the county.
Now, did you guys compile those from like personal collections, or how did you guys go about getting those?
Well, it was the Page County Heritage Association, of which I was a member, and it was decided that we needed some funds to come in, and there were a lot of books on Virginia and Germans and genealogies, and if we would put together a book with pictures that no one had ever seen before and sell it, then we could make some money,
Yeah.
which we did.
And
Right.
educate a lot of people.
It was, we asked for pictures to be donated.
Okay, so
And we were overrun with pictures, so we could definitely do a couple more books.
wow, that's awesome. And to have that pouring in of those personal pictures, like you said, that's first of all, that's a genius idea. To carve out your own niche, and to be able to sell that, because no one can duplicate that. So that was just that was like a smart idea. I wish. Now I feel like we have an abundance of pictures. Everyone's always taking a selfie and everything like that. So maybe nowadays that might not be such a lucrative idea, but I bet back then that was like a really, really innovative idea. Did you have something, Tina?
I just had a question about your most fun fact.
My first one?
A fun fact
A fun
that you like
fact.
the most.
Oh, gee. Travel is my fun place. Sorry. Travel, well, history and travel are my fun things.
Mhm. So out of the work that you've done in this area, or some of the facts that you've come across, what's been your most interesting?
we got an awful lot of pictures from one-room schools, which I knew very little about.
Like class pictures?
And yes,
Okay.
and these one-room schools were built by families. This was 1900s, 1910, 1920s, and there was a lot of farms in the country living, and the families got together and built these one-room schools, and they went from grades 1 through I think 8, and then they came into the town, and they only had school then up to 11th grade.
Okay. So now, like, the way schools work is there's a big county high school, middle school, elementary school. It sounds like back then there was almost a collective of a lot of different smaller one-room schools.
There were.
Okay, and
There were.
that was all sort of, I guess, was it, I don't even know if a word like privatized even makes sense in this context, but was it all just like the members of the community taking it upon themselves to educate their children and things like that?
Well, you have to think that travel at that time was horse and buggy. And so coming into Luray, which was the county seat, was a really difficult thing to do with a small child. It was just the thing to do, to educate, to get your families together, build your school, and provide a teacher.
Oh, so it sounds like just the sheer geography of all these mountains, it might have just been hard to get everyone in one location every morning like we can do now with buses and things like that. I didn't even think about that.
Well, our county, it's only 13 miles from the foot of one mountain to the foot of the other mountain. We're a very narrow valley, but we're long. And we go all the way from Warren County up to Rockingham in Harrisonburg, at Rockingham County. So it's a very long way to go. Even the children who, when I went to school, came from Raleighville and Compton, their school bus, they wouldn't get home till 4:30 or so because it was a long way.
Wow.
I was going to pose the same question to you. Historically, a fun fact that you've come across in this area. Thank you for sharing, by the way.
You're welcome.
Historically, well, when I first started teaching, I had 26 students, and some of them were from up in the Hollows. And one of the first students I had was a boy, and he was so sweet, but he was so backwards. And I remember he went over, I had a sink in my room. He went over to the sink, he washed his hands, opened the window and threw the paper towel out the window. It's just things like that you remember some of these students doing, and how far they've come. I've seen him since then. Of course, he's grown a lot, and he came from a very poor family, and I had his mom in GED, and she just ate up everything because she had never been really to school that much.
Yeah.
And so she was very, very appreciative of anything that you did for her.
You threw out a word that I would love some more clarity on. Holler. All right.
Yeah, the holler.
Now I know.
Hollow.
Is it a holler? Like, this might be, I'm originally from New York, so my New York vernacular might be coming
You don't
out.
have holler.
No, we don't at all. So I understand that this is like, I've heard it used as a geographical term, and I've also heard it used as a more cultural term for, like, I guess, lifestyle type of place. If I'm making sense, I've heard it used interchangeably. So maybe could you give me, a brief definition of what that?
Well,
The hollers were named after the people that lived there.
Okay.
So we have
And they still have them.
Steam
Steam
Holla,
Holler.
Dean Holla, Cubbage Holla,
It's
Cubbage
Holla, but they
Folks
call them
Holla.
hollers.
all of the names of the families that lived there.
Okay.
And the majority of the hollers in our area, Doble Holla, they are connected. The ends of them are connected to the park.
Mm.
So when the people were moved out of the park, they came down into the hollows.
Okay.
And they still to this day are the names of the people the families.
Okay. So there's a couple things. You mentioned something that I think is one of probably the most interesting through lines of this whole story, which is the park. And I know you guys have a lot of history on that, so I'd like to get to that. But I think I also want to say it seems like in sort of the Appalachian community, like family name is like very important. Lineage, it seems like is very important. Would I be correct in making that assumption?
Right.
Okay. Now, let's get into the park. I have limited history or limited knowledge of that history, so I would love for you guys just to share some of the things, the research that you guys have done, and some of the things that you've known for your whole lives about that.
You want to do first
Want me to
about the
start?
people from the park, and then I can go into the chimney part.
Can I start with the forming of the park?
Yeah.
However you'd like. However you'd
Whatever
like.
makes the most sense for
Well,
you.
I think that's an interesting story because prior to 1928, there were no national parks east of the Mississippi River,
Okay.
which is very interesting. And the federal government at that time put out a plea for the different states on the East Coast to apply their territory, their state, to become a national park. And 2 states sent in a request. They had to meet certain criteria, and it was mountains and scenic overlooks and drives and wildlife, and there were certain things that they had to come up with. And the 2 states were Virginia and Tennessee. And the government decided that they were both equally well off in those categories, and they should each have a national park. But the government was not going to purchase any of the land. It would all have to be bought by the states and given to the federal government. So when it started out, the state of Virginia, and therefore both Tennessee and Virginia, the Great Smoky Mountain National Park and Shenandoah National Park were formed at the same time. That's what I think is so interesting, that people don't know that. And our park in Shenandoah started out with about 90,000 acres. Today we're up to almost 200,000 acres. But the land was purchased by the state of Virginia, or it was condemned by the state of Virginia, and it was a good thing to keep the land from being further eroded. This was one thing.
You're saying that's probably, if there's any silver lining, was that the land was preserved?
Yes, it was being farmed a lot. There were 465 families living on the mountain at that time.
Okay.
So in 1926, Congress started this appropriation, and it wasn't until 1936 that it became a park. So it took all that time to get the land and the acreage and to get the wheels turning to make it a park.
Now, you said a word that I'm curious, when you say condemn, was that used loosely to try to say this land is not safe to live on, so like we condemn this land? Was that a tactic to force people off their land?
That's right.
Okay.
And
Because I'd have to imagine if 465 families, have been living here since their, I guess, recorded history, it'd be very hard to imagine that if you proposition 465, that all 465 would be willing to sell. So I guess I'm just kind of shocked that, I just would have to guess that something, something
How did they
was
get
afoot.
how that's very interesting to me as well.
Which I think is the sort of crux
To
of
leave their land, yeah.
well, it was very difficult, and the ones that moved out on their own moved on the Madison side of the mountain. The others came into the Page County, into the Ida section.
Okay.
And the state of Virginia did give some smaller housing for some of the people, but you can imagine those people that lived on the mountain that were 80s and 90s and they had been there all their life. Their livelihood was there, their religion was completely theirs, their speech was even theirs.
I'd have to imagine they buried a lot of their ancestors there.
The family cemeteries were around, and there were no major highways at that time. These people were very self-sufficient, and they loved living where they were. So it was a bad time in that time period. Some bad things happened, but as each generation that is removed from that 1930s, we see it a little bit different.
I was gonna say, like, how fresh is that for, descendants? Like, what is, like, how fresh is? I can't imagine it's anywhere near the same pain that, they felt around 1936. You said it was when Congress.
1936, yes, is when it was dedicated by Roosevelt.
Okay.
My grandfather and my dad were living before the park took over.
Okay.
And my dad was born in 1922. So when he was a young man, they had a house that was used by a family that my great-grandfather and my dad, it'd be my great-grandfather, he had a house set up with a family in it, and they took cattle from the valley up on the mountain each summer.
Okay.
Because there was a spring there was cooler weather. It's always 10 degrees cooler on the mountain than it is in the valley floor.
Okay.
And Daddy remembers well taking the cattle, driving them up the mountain to stay for the summer. And there were no roads at that time. The main roads had all been animal trails across the mountain, and that's where our superhighways are today, are our highways. But he said once you started an animal out with a bell on them and started them in the direction, the rest would follow. And there were a lot of sheep that went up on the mountain, a lot of cattle.
I can feel some of the pain as you're talking about these memories and your dad's memories, and I can only imagine.
But we have it today for a lot of people to see. A lot of people come and visit. We have over 2 million people a year coming into the area.
Now, is this area that I'm thinking of, is that like Skyline Drive area? Okay, which is, I see, you gotta give it to, you see why people wanted to preserve this, and it's one of the most beautiful places on the planet. But it's just a lot of people don't know that history. You know, when they pay for the park and they go on Skyline Drive, a lot of people don't know like how it got there. And I'm assuming like a lot of the, you know, I guess there were no parks east of the Mississippi. I know that, you know, a lot of the parks west of the Mississippi were, you know, probably a lot of Native Americans were pushed off, and I guess we understand that about our history, but I had never known that, you know, people who we would consider, and this is all, it's weird to talk about it this way, United States citizens that were pushed off as well. Like I'd never known that before. So it's just really interesting to know that history. And I guess technically you are descended from people who, and that's just such a cool history to think about. You know, you said your father and your grandfather would take the cattle up on the mountain every summer, and they would stay there all summer. Okay, wow.
Near Skyland. I mean, Big
Big
Meadows.
Meadows,
Big
yes.
Meadows was the area where they
Wow.
were. Yeah.
Is it? I'm sorry.
And we had, there were two wells. One was David's well, and one was Lewis, the well. And the Big Meadows Lodge still uses that well today.
Wow.
And that was on our property.
That same well.
And the David, those are the last names that you're using here? The names of the wells?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know how they got their name, but that's all I've ever known.
Oh.
David's well and Lewis well.
How about these chimneys?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the park was established in 1935, but then you said 36.
It was dedicated in 36.
Yeah. And I had at least 500 families were displaced. The elderly and the disabled were allowed to stay.
Okay.
And the last person off of the mountain was Annie Lee Bradley Shank. She was 92, and it was in 1979. I thought that was interesting.
Annie Lee was hanging in there.
Yeah. I don't know what area she was, but
Okay.
yeah. In 2013, the Blue Ridge Heritage Project was established, and Bill Henry was the leader of it. The purpose was to build chimneys in 8 of the counties where people were displaced. And so I've got the names of them. Page County is in Stanley, and you can visit all of these. Rappahannock is at Sperryville. Warren County is at Front Royal. Madison County is at Madison. Rockingham is at Elkton. Augusta, I believe, is just out of it's like out in a field. I don't think it's really at a town. Albemarle is at Crozet, and Green is at Standardsville. The stone chimney represents the strength and endurance of the mountain people, and also a lot of these structures were burned when the people left, or if they were still standing, then they just stood there until they rotted away, but the chimney was the last thing to go. So that's why they built the chimneys. Let's see, memorials were left to the discretion of the county in which they were built. All had plaques of the families that were displaced. And in Page County, I have a list of, these are all the people. This is kind of small to say,
Wonderful.
but they're all the people that were displaced. And
These are
our
all the family
families
names?
is on there. Yes, Gander is on there.
This is your family name?
Families
Gander?
on 3 of them.
Wow.
Oh, you have families on 3 of them?
We have, our family name is on
3 of those.
3 of the plaques.
When they drew the imaginary line on paper across, dividing the counties, it broke our land into Rappahannock, Madison, and Page. So my family was
They
in
separated.
3, so we're on 3 plaques.
Wow.
Is there a living document of that somewhere, or is there a where's the
You wanna
source
see
of
This
that?
is a plaque that is on the one in Stanley from Page County. And I think all the others have similar things that
Okay.
tell the
Yes,
people that
they do.
Mhm.
Yeah.
When you said
Wow.
Warren County, well, with the chimneys in Front Royal, then you said one's all the way in Crozet.
Yes.
That just put in perspective for me how big, how much land. Because I don't think I was understanding, because I've driven those distances. So to drive that, and it take however long it takes to know that that was
A long way.
that's a long way.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
how does it feel for you guys to see like gander on those chimneys?
Oh, it's
It's
nice.
nice.
Yeah.
It's
Very
nice.
nice.
The drive
Yeah.
is 105 miles long, so
Ooh.
and that encompasses a lot of territory.
Now, when I don't know if you would know this, but when they were taking the cattle up there, like, are they pretty much moving all summer? Or are they staying sort of in that same area, or are they using all 105 miles of?
No.
Okay.
One area.
Just where those wells were at, you were saying?
Around the house, yes.
Okay.
I'm,
Because they were going to the house that was up
I'm
there.
not exactly sure, but they had a lot of stone fences
Okay.
that they would put up, big, not wire like we have today, but they would clear the land too. See, there were still a lot of trees up there.
Okay.
So they would clear areas, and they had gardens. They had good gardens, and they grew crops, corn and wheat, and they cleared areas, and then with the stone walls around, pretty much. And you had a caretaker there all the time.
Okay.
Mm.
That
And
makes
there's
sense.
still apple trees up there. If you go up there,
Wow.
there are still apple
Oh.
trees that people planted up there.
That was one of my questions. Is that are there fruit trees there? So apple trees, interesting.
Yeah.
I really like the symbolism behind the chimney, because
Yeah.
once you said it, I was like, well, I wonder why. But then once you sort of read out why they chose the chimneys, I was like, that's actually really powerful.
Right.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
And then you
They
know,
have brochures. This is the Blue Ridge Heritage Project,
Wow.
and that tells a little bit about it.
Mm.
And also, I've got this book. This was my dad's book, and in the back it tells about the acres that were condemned and how much each family got. I found one that the family for 829 acres got $13,085. And for another one, 6 acres, only got $20
Oh my
for all 6
gosh.
acres.
now I know inflation and
Yeah.
it's one thing, but that's not adding up.
Something doesn't add up here.
6 acres for $20.
No.
Okay, so not
Wonderful.
only was it seems like there was some funny business going on around the word condemning, but there also seems like the compensation was far from fair.
Right. Now, someone said, I heard this somewhere, that if you had a lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
then you got more. But the
Okay.
lawyer probably
But
got
yeah,
a
the
lot
lawyer
from that too.
But I'm
So,
imagining that you
yeah.
probably had no need for a lawyer back then. You know,
No.
if you know,
No.
you're not worried about having someone on retainer because you don't think your land's going to
Right.
be taken from you.
Except for the government that
Yeah.
comes
Yeah.
along and condemns
Really?
your
But
property.
this is divided into different counties, and it has all the different land areas and how much they got for each one.
Wow.
So, and these chimneys, people have put like benches around, and they've planted just whatever the county wanted to do for that area.
And how big are these chimneys now that are displayed?
They're different sizes.
Yeah, they're all different.
Okay.
Different people built each one. The same person didn't build all of them.
No. And the stone, I think a lot of the stone came from up on the mountain.
That's awesome.
Wow.
I
Yeah.
do like that.
Yeah.
Another homage to
Yeah.
that. Wow, it's crazy. I know the audience can't see, but seeing some of these pictures of people carrying furniture down the
Yeah.
mountain, it's just insane.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, I guess, sort of knowing that history, I guess we'll go to our second question. In general, what different experiences have you encountered in your life due to your background, and what obstacles have you overcome?
Okay, well, growing up, like I said, we lived on a farm, And so I was a farm girl, and I was outside most of the time at the creek or in the barn. And then later on, after graduating from high school, I went to a bigger town and then to the city. So I've lived in the city and in the town. I met a lot of people. The first college I went to, did not know a soul, made lots of friends.
Did you want to do that from coming from the farm? Did you want to go
it
to
was
a bigger?
fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I had traveled.
Okay.
My aunt took us a lot of places when we were growing up, and so we were used to being, out and not with our family and parents. So, but just experiences that you gain. I always said that even if you just went to college just to go, whether you got a degree or not, just to go and meet people and do things that you wouldn't ordinarily do, like if you're in the country,
Do you feel like sort of the population that we're talking about, that's the norm? Do you think a lot of them have a chance to sort of get out and explore, go to college or travel, or would you say you're pretty lucky in that regard?
From here, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think now they can. Yeah,
Okay.
I think people can. And we have all nationalities that live here now.
Yeah.
So, and everybody gets along here. So I think we're lucky in that way because we share different things from different people.
That's awesome. What about, Tina, did you
I
have
was
something?
going to say, back then, do you think it was the thing to go to college, or was it like, she's like,
Well, we were always told that we could go or would go, and my family always wanted me to go to JMU, but for some reason, I didn't want to. So I went to a Baptist college for 2 years and then transferred.
So those were some of the expectations, is that you could go to college, leave the farm and go to college and explore the horizons.
I'm not sure how many people, we had 99 in our class to graduate that year, but I don't know how many actually went to college. Of course, we had trade schools too that you could go to, which are just as good.
Yeah.
So.
Now, do you think you could have, say, different generation, you were a teacher for what, did you say 34 years? Do you think you could have done the one classroom thing where you're the teacher and then all the kids are in just one room, kind of like we were talking about earlier? What would you prefer?
Probably, because kids were better behaved.
Probably, yeah.
But with my 26, I got along great with 26. One year I only had 13 students, which was, I thought it was good, but then, to do things, 13 wasn't enough.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's not the numbers game is always, sometimes too much is too much, sometimes too little is too little.
Right. Yeah.
What about you, Beth? Same question. In general, what different experiences have you encountered in your life due to your background, and what obstacles have you overcome?
Well, living here all my life, it's very easy to get into my genealogy. I have had friends who have moved here from New York and other places, and they are looking for tombstones and they're looking for records and all. I have been very lucky because all of my family for generations has lived here, and our family farm has been in our family for 200 years. So it's very easy to do my United Daughters of the Confederacy, to get into that, to join the Daughters of the American Revolution. All those records were here on tombstones.
Wow.
And the
goes back a long way.
tombstones of the 1800s, 1700s not only had born and died, but they had occupation on the stone. They had wife of so-and-so, but they had a history on tombstones, and I was very lucky to get that far. The War of 1812 was very good to me too, because all the records are here. So through the years, I have had to answer many questions for other people doing their genealogy, that their families were settled here in this area. I've taken pictures of tombstones. I've dug around in cemeteries.
Now, were you able to physically find those tombstones that you were talking about, like
Yes.
that old, like to see?
Yes.
And
Yes.
Are they in good enough condition where you can still see occupation in
Well,
years?
you have to clean them
You have to
first.
clean them up.
First things first, Gabriel.
And lots of times they're surrounded by briars.
Are they in a recognizable cemetery? Like, is it somewhere you go, oh, that's a cemetery, or
Mine
do you have to
were.
go foraging a bit?
Mine were.
Okay.
But I have been, I did one back in March for a girl who lived in Elton, and she wanted to know the family of, I forget the name of it, but anyway, I took her. We had to climb a fence, and it was in with cattle. And some of the stones had been knocked over, but we could set them up. They were not huge. And a lot of those cemeteries, though, had river rocks as headstones, which there was nothing on them, and they were smaller plots on farmland.
So unmarked river rocks?
A lot of them were.
Okay.
But within there, you might find the river rocks might be 1800, and then you might get a 1900 that had writing on it, but it was the family. You knew it was the same family.
Wow.
But the genealogy fact that I've lived here all my life, it's been easy because the surnames mean something to me when they're saying, do you know who the Garbers are, or the Stricklers, or the, their family names.
I'm amazed at the amount of research that you've done in preparation for this podcast, and lots of notes and these memories that you have. I can see little sparks of.
You have to remember I was a tour guide too.
Yeah.
These are a lot of my notes.
Yes.
What's cool?
Were there things that we didn't talk about that are in your notes?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't.
And she likes to talk too.
We like to listen. This is the place to be.
Oh. I did put together a cemetery book in 1978 when I was working for the county, and that's been very valuable.
That has to help so many people who probably coming down
It's
looking.
been so good. And I also helped with marriage bonds.
Okay.
And the marriage bonds, 1800s, you have to have permission to marry, and we put together the book on marriage bonds, which is a smaller paperback book, but it also lists who was married to who, but who paid the bonds, who was the bondsman. So that means that it's probably the father of one of them, and it's a good genealogy.
Okay.
Oh.
Wait, how much was the bond? Like, was it affordable, or was it?
It was just formality of filling out the papers,
Okay.
and they're in the courthouse.
Were all bonds the same, or do you?
They were all the same.
Okay, it's
So
is
it's
it
a
essentially like a
fee.
license.
It's like a license.
Oh, okay, I didn't know if-
And they're marriage bonds,
Okay.
but they're 1800s.
Yeah, between the marriage bonds and the cemetery, I feel like if someone, was curious who lived in Page County, or even coming down from somewhere like New York and now their lineage is from Page, gathering all that, writing the history down has to be so helpful, and especially because it's a living document for people to come
Sure.
and see, and you can always add to it the more you find. And it seems like every time you come up with another project, it just
Connects.
it's
It
another
does.
piece of
It
the puzzle.
does.
Like you did cemeteries, marriage bonds, and then the history. Like I just think that's so amazing. So
I like history and travel.
well, that's perfect for you.
How about in your notes? What were some of the things we haven't
Yeah, we don't want to miss
shared?
anything.
Oh, let's see. Well, I think that's all for that.
And are your family, I'm assuming, is buried here in the cemeteries?
Well, there's a family cemetery,
Mm.
and it's enclosed with a metal fence, and there have been cows around it. There have been buffalo around it at one time.
Whoa.
And my dad and my mom are buried there, and my grandparents. And we just went to a cemetery near my house, and one of our relatives, Alfred Gander, was in World War II, and he received a Purple Heart. And so all of the children of the church there got together and they put up the flags for Memorial Day.
Wow.
But and there's one over in where my mom and dad are buried, and what is that? There's a memorial there that I'm not sure who that is.
That's to Martin Van Buren.
Okay, Gander.
He was a courier to Robert E. Lee, and he has his Confederate marker.
Yeah, it's metal and it's like a cross.
It's crazy because you guys, you said Confederacy and then American Revolution. Like, that's a long time ago to be able to trace something. That's a very long time. Like,
But you have to remember, I'm the lucky one because the tombstones were right here. And you have a paper to fill out, and when I sent in my DAR papers, and they're legal size papers, mine came back perfect, which is really unheard of.
yeah.
They said,
Wow.
we can't believe that, well, both of my papers, the DAR and the UDC, both came back perfect because I had filled in all the slots.
Yeah, you probably.
And this is your jam, so you like this kind of stuff. It's like your thing. So anything else that you haven't shared? And I'm just really thankful for your time and sharing and being vulnerable. I know some of these questions are, like in your business, but I think it's helpful for the history and for our viewers too, to have a better understanding about the park, how it evolved, how it came to be, but also the people, some people, which I didn't know, that people were moved off the land.
Yeah.
And had to give up their land for little, next to nothing in some instances. So, as we're approaching our the end of our podcast, if there's anything else you'd like to share, or Gabriel?
There's another question that before we wrap up I'd like to definitely ask. Nancy, you said something about how Page County was just becoming more diverse over time, and I think Beth, since you've been integrated in this community, both of you guys in different aspects for a long time, I guess this third question, how do you think businesses and the community as a whole can build an atmosphere that's more inclusive and welcoming of everyone?
I think we have. I mean, we have all different people. We have eateries that have the food from those countries.
Yeah.
And we have venues for plays. We have the movie theater. We have clubs for young people, middle-aged people, and older people. And whenever we have like parades, or we have the Sunflower Festival or the Christmas parade, everybody comes. I mean, it's not just a certain group, it's everybody.
I will say that was my first event that I worked when I started this job. It was a Sunflower Festival, and it was like you said, all different types of people there.
Yeah.
And people came from all over, and everyone was welcome.
Yeah.
And it was just like, it was a good feeling. I was like, oh,
Right.
this is gonna be fun.
And no problems.
Yeah.
We very rarely have problems.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
So
What about you, Beth? Do you want to repeat the question, or?
Well, I go back to our natural resources, and we're fortunate to have 3 very good natural resources in our vicinity. And it's the Blue Ridge Mountains, Shenandoah National Park, the Massanutten Mountain, which has the George Washington Forest, and we have the Shenandoah River. And they are our natural resources, and they're what bring in people This is how all of our youth always work at the caverns or on the mountain. They've provided employment for us through the years. And if you've lived here, you've either worked in the caverns, which I did, or worked on the mountain, which I did. Nancy worked on the mountain. They've given us the opportunity to have some money, and they bring in the people too, and therefore it's increased our bed and breakfast, our motels, our everything has grown because of these three natural resources, I believe.
So the mountain and valley are the gifts that just keep on giving. So as long as, you know.
Very little valley here, 13 miles now.
That's right, you said it. So would it be
From the
13
base-
miles this way, but it's long, it's the distance.
It's
that's
very
really-
long.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Well, thank you guys so much for sharing that history. Like, I seriously was very surprised. I pride myself on being a history buff as well. But the cool thing about history is the more you know, the less you know. Like, as you
You
start
want to know more.
yeah, well, you start to understand, like,
You want to know more.
you find a whole nother rabbit hole of history that you just don't know about, and this was something that I don't know about. Or you realize that maybe you were just too broad in your knowledge or something, and the deeper you dive, you start to find these cool stories, and you start to find people like yourselves who have, you know, acquired this history, which is really all that is like history is a combination of primary, secondary, and tertiary sources, and we get that from people like you guys. I mean, think about the collections that you guys did for that first photograph book. You know, like, a lot of times that's how we solve the big mysteries of history. So I just think it's amazing and excellent that you guys know so much. Do you have something?
I have a quote here.
Oh, that's right. You have two
quote.
quotes, right?
Well, this one I think is very interesting. It's from Washington Irving.
Okay.
And he wrote that the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia is equal to the Promised Land in fertility and far superior in its beauty.
Wow.
That was written by Washington Irving.
Washington. Who is Washington Irving? What's its significance does he hold in history?
Well, he was an author. He was, I don't know when he lived. I just happened to come across this.
Yeah, and that is not the first quote that I've heard from people who are not from the Shenandoah Valley speak of its prominence with such regard. So, like I said, you can see why, it was, something to be coveted.
At one time, see, we're so close to Washington, D.C. too. And so Washington Irving must have come through the valley at some time.
Yeah.
Imagine a Sleepy Hollow.
And that's what he wrote.
That's what Carrie said.
Oh, is that what he wrote? Oh, is that the author?
Yeah.
Oh.
He wrote, yeah, thank you. I couldn't think of what he wrote.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
She had a second
Did you
quote.
have a second quote?
Yeah.
No, that
was it?
we've already discussed that one.
Okay. Well, I don't think I can top that. I don't
Well, I thought that was interesting.
That was-
Washington
yeah.
Irving,
Wow. Yeah. So I think people saw that same reverence for it today, and it is it was a pleasure for you guys to come down and share not only your personal history, but the history of a lot of the members of this community that you guys have gathered, and we're really grateful for that. Tina, do you have anything else to say?
No, I just love the history part of it, and then the fact that you guys are continuing to share, even with the younger ones, like being candid about the land and how the park came to be. I think that those stories will continue to be shared
They
through
were the
generations.
stories that the people on the tour buses wanted to hear. And when I took a class, Daddy and I took a class, and it was given by the Park Service. And they started, this is what you're going to tell the groups coming through. They started back when North America and South America were joined. and then it comes up through the Ice Age, and then the rocks.
Oh, you guys started way back.
And we got out of that meeting, and I remember Daddy looked at me and he said, "Is that what you're going to talk about?" And I
You're
said,
like, oh.
"What are you going to talk about?" He said, "Not that."
I'm gonna get straight to the point.
They wanted you to talk about the Ice Age.
And so
Yeah.
we started telling our own history, you know, and Daddy could, of course, was a whole lot better than I was, but I would hear his stories and tell the people, and that's what they wanted to hear. What do you all do here?
Yeah.
You know, what do the people do?
Get to the point.
You're isolated here. What
know,
do you do?
Maybe we're gonna have
Yeah.
to do another recording where you just go through and we just follow you with the camera and you give us, you know, you try your best to give us a tour.
No. You had a lot of it today.
It's been a
You
pleasure.
had a lot of it.
Oh man. Well, all right, guys. Thank you for joining us on this episode of My Story Weaves Our Story. This is the end of season 1, so we will see you guys next season. Bye.